What up, team? Welcome into another episode of the Fit CEO podcast. Hopefully, you guys are doing freaking amazing. So, do your clients struggle with buyer's remorse? In the first 30 days, do you get a lot of cancel requests? In the first 30 days, do you get a lot of refund requests? In the first 30 days, are your clients really not that satisfied? Are you worried? Do you feel like, hey, maybe I'm not a good coach? Maybe my program sucks. Maybe I'm not meant for this. If that is a fear of yours, or if that is your current reality, meaning that is happening with a percentage of your client base, your program does not suck. You are not a bad coach. It is none of those things. Let's get that out of your head. What it is you are missing this one key element. And what that one key element is called activation points. All right. Not a lot of business coaches talk about activation points. It's something I learned maybe about a year and a half ago. However, I did a training on it, and I want to show you guys that training, because if you have an effective activation point, it could remove and or eliminate a client's buyer's remorse, which, and not only just remove, actually, let me take my words back there. Not only just remove and eliminate buyer's remorse, but if you have the right activation point, it can also increase client satisfaction, increase client retention, and increase your referral rate as well. So without further ado, we're going to get into this training. On the back end of this, you guys won't be hearing from me. So if you guys are enjoying the podcast, if this is providing you value, please make sure that you subscribe, leave a review, share it on your Instagram, tell a friend. I don't run ads to this. So the only way that this grows is by word of mouth. So appreciate y'all, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace. All right, let's talk about activation points. So this is going to be a little bit of data. What I really love about the NLCA program is, we really harp on data. And like we talked about in the data tracking module, or the sales basics tracking module, we talked about the importance of making data-driven decisions. Now, in that module, we talked about data-driven decisions specifically for the sales process. Well, what you're going to see in the next coming modules, the onboarding module, the client delivery module, the client retention module, is data also drives client success and helps you make decisions in order to continue to drive client success. This is going to be the first data point that we talk about that drives client success. And in the client success point that it drives is eliminating buyer remorse and getting your clients bought in. All right. Let's talk about it. So what exactly is an activation point? So an activation point is a certain activity or result that a client has to achieve in the first 30 days that would deem them, in quotes, activated. Activated could be defined as being fully bought in on the program. As a result of them doing X, Y, Z, they are now activated. Or as a result of them achieving X, Y, Z, they are now activated. Okay? What does all that mean? Essentially, what that means is you're going to come up with either things they have to do, so activities, or a results they have to achieve in the first 30 days. And if they do the things that you're saying they have to do in the first 30 days, or they achieve the thing that you said they have to achieve in the first 30 days, that would deem them activated. And activated means they're fully bought in on the program, meaning they have no more second guessing. They have no more like, should I continue with this? Is this the right program for me? They are fully bought in. This is the program. And even further than that, they're extremely satisfied. They're open to giving referrals, and they want to stay with you a long time. All right, so that's what activated means. All right, here's a couple examples of activation points. All right, so Orange Theory has an activation point where if their clients enter the gym 10 times in the first month, they are deemed activated. All right, this isn't necessarily something that they are communicating to the clients, right? They're not saying, hey, you need to come to the gym 10 times and you're activated. That's not what this means. This is an internal thing, meaning this is something that you look at within your company. It's not something that you externally communicate to the clients like, hey, you have to do this or else you aren't activated. No, this is, all right, internally, we're going to come up with this and we're going to make sure that we track this. Yes, we're going to make sure that the clients do this. We're not going to tell them it's an activation point. We'll just make sure that they're doing these things, but internally we're going to track and we understand if they do these things, they are activated. All right, so for Orange Theory, once again, they track to make sure that all new clients come into the gym 10 times within their first month. And what data has shown is that if a client does come in 10 times in their first month, they tend to have longer retention, refer more people, and end up being more satisfied. All right, here's another example. So NLCA, our company has 2 activation points. All right, we have an activation point where we make sure that our clients attend 6 calls in their first 30 days. And then we have another activation point that is not centered around an activity, but is centered around a result. And that second activation point is making sure that our clients sign their first client in the first 30 days. And if they do, they are deemed activated. All right. 2 separate activation points for NLCA. Those aren't both one, those are 2 separate ones. All right. And once again, one is about them doing a thing, which is attending 6 calls. And one is about them achieving a result, which is signing their first client with NLCA in the first 30 days. All right, so those are 2 examples. So why do we need activation points? And then we'll talk about how to create your activation points. All right, so here's why we need an activation point. So it is proven that if you know what a client needs to do or achieve in their first 30 days to be deemed, in quotes, activated, that you will have better retention, less refund requests, more referrals, and overall improved satisfaction. So as we've been talking about, if we can figure out what it is that a client has to do in the first 30 days in order to be activated, then we can, like I said, improve retention, have less refund requests, remove buyer's remorse, get more referrals, improve overall client satisfaction. There's a lot of positive things that come as a result of understanding what this is. Now, before we get into how to create your activation points, one thing I do want to say is this is a work in progress. I do not expect you right off the bat to know exactly what a client has to do in order to be activated. All right, we're going to take our best guess to start. And as you go, as your business grows, as your program grows, after years and years and years, you'll have a better understanding of what actually gets them activated. And you could adjust, you can adjust your activation points over time. In the Master Coach program, we're going to talk about something called data-based marketing, which will even further help your understanding of activation points. Okay, so how to create your activation points. All right, so this is going to be rough draft number 1. You're going to roll with it. You're going to start tracking it, and then you're going to tweak it over time as you learn what actually really drives activation in your business. Okay, so step number 1, choosing if you want your activation points to be based on a result or based on an activity. All right, so here's the example. All right, so here's an example if you choose it to be based on a result. A result could be a certain amount of weight lost in the first 30 days. It could be a certain amount of weight gained in the first 30 days. It could be a certain amount of inches lost in the first 30 days. It's basically any measurable result. So anything that can actually be measurable, quantifiable, something that has a numeric to it would be a results-driven activation point. All right. The second one here is an activity-driven activation point. All right. So an example there would be a certain amount of check-ins, a certain amount of nutrition protocols, a certain amount of workouts completed, a certain amount of any behavioral change, right? Anything that they have to do that's a part of the program, right? For us, once again, it's attending 6 support calls in the first month. That's the activity-driven one. All right. So you're just going to choose one of the 2. You're either going to have a results-driven activation point, or you're going to have an activity-driven activation point. No, not necessary to have 2, just pick one. All right, so step 2, we're going to finalize the metric of your activation point. All right, so once we've chosen if it's going to be a result or if it's going to be an activity, we now need to figure out, all right, if it is an activity, what activity? And if it is a result, what result? All right, so now that you have decided what you are basing your activation point on, result or activity, now we need to finalize the actual metric itself. So when finalizing the metric, it is best to have just one singular metric. You want to balance what is the best activation point, but you also want to balance what is clean and easy to track. I was meant to say sometimes, my bad. Sometimes the best activation point isn't always realistic to track. All right. So let me see if I can think of an example right off the bat. Let's say that the best activation point for you is, tracking they need to hit an exact body fat percentage in the first 30 days, just pulling something out of my ass here. That may be the best activation point. That may be the thing that actually drives results, but it may be really, really hard for you to track. It may be really, really hard for you to get an accurate reading of what that looks like within your client base. Therefore, it may not be the best activation point for you to choose. So when choosing the metric, there's a dichotomy here. There's a balance here. What is the best activation point? Meaning if the client did this, they would be deemed activated, but also what is reasonable and easy for me to track. All right, so it's finding that balance between the two. All right, so this is why we, NLCA, chose to make our activation point attending 6 support calls in their first 30 days. Attending 6 support calls ensures they are bought in, but also is an easy metric for us to track since we already track attendance. All right, so we already track our attendance. It's easy, right? So there was no additional tracking. There was no additional work we really had to put in because it was something that we already tracked, right? And when we go over your check-in protocols and things like that, right, pulling things from check-in protocols are easy activation points because it's something that you already track, right? So just giving you examples here, you're not limited to these things. These are just our suggestions. Okay, so step 1, you just have to choose if it's going to be a results-driven activation or an activity-driven activation. Step 2, we actually need to choose the metric. All right, so if it's an activity, what activity are we deeming as activation? If it's a result, what result are we deeming as activation? All right, so that's what you should have so far. Is it going to be results or activity? Depending on the one, what is the metric we're tracking? Okay, now moving on to step 3, choosing your activation KPI. So KPI, fancy word for key performance indicator. All right, so what's the actual measurable of our activation, right? So first, what is the activation? Second, what is the metric? Third, what is the metric that would deem this activation to be successful? All right, so let's break this down. So now that you know the metric of your activation and what that is, we now need to define the KPI. The KPI for this metric will be defined as a percentage of students that hit activation within the timeline. The timeline is obviously 30 days. Here's an example. So our activation is attend 6 support calls in the first 30 days. Our KPI is we want 70% of our students by the time they hit their 30th day to have achieved attending 6 support calls. So how do we determine if 70% is met? We take the number of students who hit activation and divide that by the number of students who have completed their 30-day mark. All right, this number is tracked monthly. So on a monthly basis, we restart and retrack the number. All right, and our goal is we want 70% of our students to achieve this feat. All right, so that's our KPI, that's our goal. So now you need to come up with this number right here. What's the percentage of students that you want to hit your activity and or your results within 30 days? All right, that will be your KPI. All right, that can adjust over time. So let's say you make it 80%, and let's say you go 6 months and you've never hit 80%, haven't even come close, and you know that you're trying your hardest to help students hit activation, then it may not be the right KPI for you, right? So you'll learn this over time. Right now, we're just taking our best solid guess. Okay, so step 4 is choosing the timeline of activation. We kind of already given the timeline for you, so this will be a brief discussion, but I personally think a 30-day timeline for activation is always best. Anything less isn't enough time for the result or activity to occur. And 45 days would literally be the max I would extend it to. Anything past 45 days is too deep into the program to be considered activated, especially if it's only a 90-day program, right? If this person's in a 3-month program and you're saying that it takes 45 days for them to get activated, that's half their program before they're deemed activated, right? So I think 30 days is the best timeline here because it's not too far where if they're deemed activated, it's halfway through the program, but it's not too little that it doesn't give them enough time to get the activation result or activity completed. All right, so that's timeline. Step number 5 here is tracking your activation points. All right, so this is a simple little tracker. Obviously, do with it with what you please, right? I'm just trying to show you like what you should have on your tracker. You should have the client's name. You should have the metric being tracked. I just chose check-ins, and the number 4 was the one I chose for this example. The timeline date, so meaning when is their 30 days up, right? So at what point? So Steve Jobs joined on 6/1, so that means his 30 days is 6/30. Hannah Bacon joined on 6/1, so that means that her 30 days is right here, right? And then did they hit activation, yes or no? All right, so once again, Steve Jobs, Hannah Bacon, metric tracked. The metric tracked is they need to submit 4 check-ins in their first 30 days. Steve Jobs did that. Yes, he hit activation. Hannah Bacon only did 1 check-in in their first 30 days. No, she did not hit activation. All right, so this is your activation tracker. I would recommend doing a new one every month. So at the bottom here, right, maybe this is January, then you duplicate, and that's February, and then I would do a new one every month. And then I would have somewhere maybe off to the side what the total activation was for the month, right? So by the end of the month, when everybody hit their 30 days, what was the activation point, right? And sometimes that's going to carry over, right? So in this example, Steve Jobs and Hannah Bankin, they signed on 6/1. But for people who sign on 6/2, their date is going to be 7/1, right? It's going to be July 1st. So I can't count them in the June category. I can only count them in the July, right? So they would be counted, their actual score would be counted against the July activation point. So there's a little bit of a continued turnover there, but all people who hit activation within the month of June will count towards the June metric. All people who hit activation within the month of July will count in the July metric. All right, so build it out month by month, right? You have these important metrics here, and then somewhere off to the side, you would have your total activation for the month. All right, and there's going to be in the client delivery module, there's going to be a master doc to track all of your client success metrics, but this is a good starting point. All right, so that's activation points. Once again, go through this exercise, decide if it's going to be results driven or activity driven, decide what the metric is, decide what the KPI is, decide what the timeline is, start tracking this, and then we're going to move on to the next section, which is the different types of onboarding.